Welcome back to Season 7 of the ReidConnect-Ed podcast, co-hosted by myself, Dr. Gerald Reid, licensed psychologist, and my sister, Alexis Reid, educational therapist. We're a sibling team providing resources on mental health, education, and sport and performance psychology.
When I say the word hazing, how do you conceptualize what that word means, or what does it bring to your mind?
Is it forcing an incoming group member to earn their way into the group? Is it playful? Is it harmless? Is it a way to bond? Or is it much more than that? We're going to find out today.
So think about it again. When I say the word hazing, what kind of behaviors do you think of?
Is it humiliating someone? Is it forcing someone to do their chores? Is it requiring someone to drink at a party? Or could it be much more than that? We're going to discuss that as well today.
Okay, Jer, one more time. And for the audience out there, when I say the word hazing, what type of groups do you imagine and think of?
Do you imagine the stereotypical movie scene of white college men in a fraternity forcing the incoming freshman recruits to do something completely humiliating at a party? Or do you consider other possibilities of where hazing can happen?
How are we supposed to understand the topic of hazing when it's an experience that so often happens in private or in secrecy?
Today, we're hoping to shine a light on this topic of hazing and to bring the experience to the surface with a psychologist who specializes in researching the topic of hazing. We'll discuss the nature of hazing, the historical context of hazing, psychological factors that contribute to hazing and being hazed, the consequences of being hazed, and the way in which colleges and individuals can address hazing on their campus.
So today we're joined by Elizabeth Allan. She's a professor of higher education at the University of Maine College of Education and Human Development, where she also directs the Hazing Prevention Research Lab. In addition, she's the founder and principal of StopHazing, a research group working on developing evidence-based research to practice hazing prevention programs and initiatives. Dr. Allan's research focuses on campus cultures and climates, including studies on classroom teaching, campus diversity, and equity, in addition to student hazing and its prevention, and has authored or co-authored more than 40 research-based articles and book chapters. Thank you so much, Dr. Allan, for being here with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. This is a pretty niche topic to get involved in. It's certainly, as we said, not something that's spoken through society, at least publicly. And so maybe you can start, just tell us, how did you get involved in this type of research? What really kind of sparked your interest in trying to shine a light on this topic?
Yeah, sure. So it was basically, grounded in my own experience, initially working with college students. And I was, out of my master's degree program, working in leadership development initiatives for college students at a university, supporting them, with their involvement in clubs, organizations, and teams, and doing leadership development work. And in the process of that, I there were more than 100 different clubs and organizations. I got to meet a lot of students and work with them. And I started hearing about hazing happening. And the students at the time would just talk about it as if it was just a normal part of college. And I was a little bit concerned, but also, I hadn't really had experience of it myself. So at the same time that I was hearing these stories from students, I also came across a book written by Hank Newer, a journalist and author. And the name of the book was Broken Pledges. And it was basically the story of Eileen Stevens, whose son was killed in a hazing incident in a college fraternity years before. But it was making the news because she was going out and talking about it. And so she was going to various news programs, national news programs and talk shows like Oprah and things like that. And so people were starting to become more aware of the serious potential harm and the way in which hazing could even be deadly. So that happened right around the time I'm hearing these stories from students. And I found myself in a position of influence, like I could actually do something potentially to have an impact. So that's what got me started, because I just realized, wow, this is, something could go terribly wrong, even though these students, weren't at the time fearful of their lives, could see that the ingredients were there, the conditions were there for something to really, escalate and or just take a wrong turn at any moment. And I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I didn't want to have any knowledge of that without knowing that I did everything I could to try to intervene or prevent it. And when I started doing that work, and I worked alongside the students, because many of them didn't like what was happening either, but they just accepted it as part of the culture. And so that was how I started learning more about how entrenched it was and how difficult it was to change it, because of course the students didn't want to report it because they didn't want to get their friends in trouble, and or they didn't want to be ostracized from the group. And so all those things made it very, very challenging to change and or to prevent. And so that was really what got me more involved as a professional, and then eventually as a scholar. From there, I went on to earn my PhD, and that was, when I acquired more tools as a researcher to be able to take a deeper dive into understanding the nature and extent of the problem, and, what would be some effective strategies for prevention.
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for really being a leader. I think that is what leadership is having the courage to do something, right, when maybe other people are not, or turning a blind eye. So first of all, thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
And secondly, you made some points that really stand out to me. One of which is that hazing, and I'd like for you to, after I say this, to kind of set the stage for what hazing is, so the audience can understand what the word means. But what you had said was that people maybe normalized it, or you had mentioned the worst possible scenario of someone dying from it, right? And it's such a broad topic, I believe, that makes people maybe not have a strong opinion about it, because there is such a wide range of what hazing could look like, that it makes the response to it perhaps not consistent, or not strong enough, perhaps, because maybe they think of it in a less severe way. And you also mentioned just the normalization of it, despite people having pretty strong feelings about it, but having a hard time speaking up. So, you can share your reaction to that, or even, kind of set the stage of how the audience can really understand what is hazing in the first place. Like, how do we understand it?
Sure. Yeah. So we define hazing, and this is in, the research that we do, but also it's a basis for many policies and state laws, and even now federal law. But the sort of core of the definition is any activity expected of someone joining or participating in a group that humiliates, degrades, abuses, or endangers them, regardless of a person's willingness to participate. Now, that's a mouthful, I understand. So what we usually do when we're doing workshops and educational trainings or providing resources is we break it down into three key components or parts to that definition. First is its behavior expected of someone joining or participating in a group. So hazing involves a group context versus bullying, right? There's some behaviors that really resemble bullying behaviors and hazing, and certainly there is overlap, but there's a distinction between the two. So hazing involves that group context, joining or participating in a group. Secondly, it involves certain types of behaviors. It's not just any behavior, but it's abusive, degrading, endangering behavior, or the potential for that. And then thirdly, it can happen regardless of a person's willingness to participate. So that's the consent piece. And that third component is one that often trips people up. And they say, yeah, that happened, but it wasn't hazing because we gave them a choice of whether or not to do it. People had free choice. We hear that over and over again. And I know that campus professionals and school administrators and teachers hear that too. And it can be really confusing. But when you break it down and you look at why is that clause there, it's really all about power, because you think you have the situation going back to that group context of hazing. So you have the peer pressure situation. And then you have the second piece, which is the joining. Every human being wants to belong to something. It's a basic human need. So you have those two forces. You have strong desire to belong, that human need, coupled with that peer pressure, that group context. And that, coalesces, you combine those two and you are very likely to have a coercive environment. So when coercion is involved, it really impedes a true consent. That's why it can still be hazing, even if a person is given a choice of whether or not to do it. So those three components are really core to the definition of hazing. And I think it's a lot easier to remember it that way. The group context, the abusive behavior or potentially harmful behavior, and then regardless of a person's willingness to participate.
Can you clarify? That was a great description. Can you clarify that part of people saying, oh, we gave them a choice? I don't want to assume what that means, but I am assuming that means that people would say, you don't have to join our group and therefore you don't have to experience this hazing? Or is it more, hey, you can join the group without being hazed? Can you clarify that for the audience?
Sure. It's often like, hey, we're going to have a rookie night, for example, and we've got alcohol, but you don't have to drink. And the reality is some students will say, I'm not going to, but there are many who feel pressured to do so because they'll often also hear, this is what we've done every year. This is a tradition. This is, and so it's implied that this is what one does to feel a part of the group, to be accepted, to be seen as good as the others who have come before.
Not to mention that these are 18-year-old young people. You can argue, are they still adolescents, versus being an adult at that point in a brand new environment? Oftentimes, they may not be freshmen, they may be, but most of the time they're first-year students who are, as you said, in a brand new environment, don't maybe have no ties to the school, maybe have no relationship to any adult or peer. And so as you're saying, that peer pressure is going to be probably more significant than in other contexts. And that's also another kind of form of implicit coercion that may not be understood as much because it all seems like it's all part of the fun, right? You can imagine the beginning of being a fraternity or sorority or whatever the group is, and you can tell us more about that. It's not just Greek-like; if it's different groups. That the context is, oh, this is fun. This is, we're doing this because it's going to become a positive experience. So there's that kind of reframing of it that could be, in some ways coercive.
Absolutely, yes.
It's so interesting too, that last third part. I can hear people kind of minimizing the experience, being like, oh, it's not a big deal. I like the way you were emphasizing the point that a lot of people say, this is just what we all did. This is what we've been doing for years. This is the tradition. And it almost reinforces the bad behavior, right? It's almost like, this is not a big deal, which makes a lot of people who may or may not even be vulnerable think that this is the thing to do. And I'm thinking back to, we've done several episodes on perfectionism, which talk a lot about social anxiety. We've talked a lot about social anxiety just on its own. We've also talked a lot about this feeling of disconnection. Episode 1 of the season, we talk about self-regulation and this idea of the fact that we live in this world that's overly connected, but so many people feel so disconnected from each other. And how do we even think about how to regulate in these situations where we might have an opportunity to connect? And this is, I think, a really great case in point. And we've been focusing a lot on, the college campuses where I think most frequently we'll hear the word hazing come up. And I'd love to expand it and think about all of the different scenarios, groups, and social situations, professional situations, where some of your research and some of your work has also shined a light on the fact that hazing can exist and show up in a lot of different places across our lifespan.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you raised that, because I do want to make it clear that the research has documented hazing fairly high rates, close to 50% for high school students.
Wow.
Nationally. And there's some researchers that have examined it at the middle school level as well. And of course, we know that it happens beyond college and graduate school, professional training, the military, and other contexts as well.
Athletic teams.
And I think to your point, this is something that we're approaching because of the pervasiveness of it. And I think it's very, takes people by surprise to know that it's not just a fraternity issue still, because it really is in many ways, just embedded in the culture of just how things happen. And it's been tolerated and sometimes even accepted. And you can tell that, for example, by the euphemisms that are often used to describe it. For example, as you alluded to, people will call it, oh no, that wasn't hazing, that was just pranks. That was just jokes. That was just an initiation, just an initiation, just a tradition. And so people are still very confused about when behavior crosses the line into hazing. And in order to, really prevent it and to promote well-being for our youth and young adults and beyond, we have to get that clarity and understand why it can be harmful, and moreover, why we don't need it. How can we can still accomplish.
How can we bond in positive ways?
Yes, we can still have traditions. Yeah. We can still have initiations. We can still have fun and jokes, but we don't need to be hazing people and abusing them.
Yeah. I keep thinking about these young kids who are exposed to so much through social media and the internet, who, I have some 4th, 5th, 6th grade students I work with sometimes who are doing their skin regimen, doing these very adult-like things that they've seen on social media. And, I know you mentioned the research is happening in middle and high school. I wonder what's even happening in elementary school sometimes. We hear about, the recess, playground scuffles that might happen. And, how much are they maybe taking from what they see? And I'm not saying that this is absolutely happening. Anecdotally, I haven't heard this, but I'm curious if it might exist, because a lot of younger people, a lot of young children are doing things that they're seeing that are much more mature and adult than they maybe even know what's happening, without the same intent as perhaps an adult would be, quote unquote, hazing. I wonder how that might be playing out in childhood. I don't know if you have any data points or information on that.
I don't have any or know of anything earlier than, research-wise.
Right.
Earlier than middle school, but one of the things that we're doing and very excited about in terms of prevention is promoting workshops and trainings that focus on the behavior we want to see.
Yes, I love that.
And we're really modeling this after, bullying, interpersonal violence prevention. And for example, often those strategies, public health approaches focus on interpersonal relationships between, romantic partners or friendships. But in this case, we're adapting that to groups. So we're doing a lot of communicating resources and trainings around 10 signs of healthy and unhealthy groups.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And so we're doing that for all ages, but we haven't yet done it at the grade school level. We've been in secondary schools, but I think we can adapt it to younger ages because it's never too soon to start thinking through and developing the skills to identify what is a healthy group situation, what is an unhealthy group situation. And we're not saying that all the unhealthy behaviors are hazing, but they're behaviors that set the stage, that make it more likely for hazing to happen. So that's something, that I think has a lot of promise. We still have to we're evaluating it right now in some research studies, and it's showing some really positive results so far.
That's great.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few topics I want to get into with you both in terms of just understanding the dynamics, the psychological aspects of hazing and being hazed. But there's a thread that I want to pull on for now, which is you were saying the potential harm that could be done from hazing, right? Because I think this is an important part. If people are listening to this and they're like, oh, it's not harmful, they're going to stop listening. They're going to kind of tune it out, right? They're not going to think more about it. So in terms of the potential harm, I'd like to hear two things. One of which is the range of types of behaviors that could happen in the hazing context. Because I have heard some stories that literally make my skin crawl. I can't even imagine a human being would do that to another human being, right? And so I think if you don't, we don't necessarily have to get into like the gruesome details of it, but if you can give some context to how severe the behavior can get. And then on the other hand, because some people would say, oh, well, that just, nobody does that, or that's a rare thing. So I'm going to stop listening now because that's a rare thing. I also want to emphasize that even if it is less extreme, are there people who are more vulnerable to being harmed by it, even if it's not a quote unquote severe behavior? Because as a therapist, as a psychologist, we work with people all the time. There's individual differences about who's affected by what and why. People come in with a full range of histories. This is actually what my dissertation was about, is that people come in with a full range of histories that could make them more vulnerable to being experiencing the same experience differently than their peer. And nobody would know it because psychological harm, emotional harm, and even sometimes physical harm, right, could be unnoticed by people because it's private. And the person who has difficulties already is probably also going to have a hard time advocating and expressing those harms that are done, right? So there's even more downstream negative effects of people not being able to articulate it because they have all these anxieties and fears and everything that comes along with it.
Shame and embarrassment.
Shame, embarrassment, and the people engaging in the hazing may not even realize it. And perhaps if they did realize it, perhaps even the people who normalize it would pull back and say, whoa, we have to stop this. This is not good. It's almost like there's no break. That tipping point comes so quickly when something horrible happens that there's not really that buildup, because I think people don't realize what is actually happening. Psychological harm is like people don't have thought bubbles, in their life. You can't see what's going on in their head, especially if they have all these reasons to not share. So definitely want to emphasize this and how important this is in terms of the public understanding it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think as far as the harm goes, I think, one statistic that seems to be getting lots of attention is the fact that there have been more than 100 deaths from hazing since the year 2000. So that's at its most extreme. Students are dying. Those are typically, there's a chronology of hazing deaths and a database on hazinginfo.org if listeners would like to get more information there. But, there's a whole range of harm that can occur. I mean, that's the most extreme, and that's often what people think about when they're asked, when you think of the harm from hazing, what comes to mind? And it's typically, what they've heard about in the headlines. But we also know there's a whole continuum of what we call the spectrum of hazing, and it can include behaviors from humiliating and degrading kinds of behaviors to harassment behaviors to physical violence. And as you said,
sleep deprivation,
absolutely,
sexual acts,
sexual assault, sexual simulations, eating vile substances,
hurting animals,
mistreating, abusing animals, stealing property, asking people to do illegal activity, expecting them to participate in reckless kinds of acts, walking over high bridges without protection, driving while blindfolded. I mean, it's then you've got the alcohol, sometimes often that's involved, or abuse of alcohol, but sometimes not. And it's also excessive consumption of normally edible foods or liquids. We've had several deaths from water intoxication, for instance. Hazing can involve financial aspects, asking new members to incur excessive financial cost, purchasing items for other members of the group or for the team or the organization. So, it really takes so many different forms, and at its core, is the abuse of power that's involved. Because, sometimes I've had students say, or, people we've been working with, well, geez, anything can be hazing. And therefore, their takeaway from that is, so I'm not going to pay any attention to this because I can't take this seriously because anything can be hazing. And that's missing the forest for the trees. Because,
totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about how the activity is implemented. I often say, like, when my daughters were young and I was involved in leading their Girl Scout troop, we could have a scavenger hunt and it wasn't hazing. But scavenger hunts can turn into hazing. And, I think those are the skills that we have to build in our young people, is those, having those conversations ahead of time and understanding how can one behavior, like drinking a glass of water, can be fine. But then when you ask someone to drink, 5 gallons of water in a short period of time, it's not fine anymore. I think, that seems obvious, but, then some of the things are a little bit more nuanced, and having conversations ahead of time and understanding when something crosses the line can go a long way for, toward prevention.
It almost reminds me of like hazing as like a gatekeeper to enter this elite or certain group, right? It's almost like you need to do this to be able to pass go or to enter into this realm of whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, that is often, the case, that the groups are maybe have some kind of social capital, or they're considered prestigious, highly selective. And so it might make it more likely that people see, well, if I do that, I might not be comfortable doing this, but if I do it, I'll be on the other side and I'll have these benefits.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's as simple as class hazing. So the first year students in the high school, the freshmen are going to, it's like
Dazed and Confused.
Yeah.
Like in the movie.
So it really takes so many different forms, and is a lot more common than many people realize.
And Elizabeth, it's not the stereotypical white male fraternity, right? Crosses different races, ethnicities. It crosses different types of groups. It could be the band team on campus. It could be all different
Mm-hmm.
socioeconomical statuses. And I love what you said, Lex. It's so true. And also, just imagine someone being a college freshman. Imagine they worked really hard to become a college student and they worked really hard to get there. Maybe it's like they're the first generation to go to college, whatever it is, like whatever meaningfulness it is to go. And they experience the hazing. And let's say they're the individual who's going to be negatively affected. And all of a sudden, like it's a downstream effect of how their life is going. Maybe they can't keep up with their grades. Everything they built up, right? It can go from a very positive, oh, I'm going to join a group, I'm going to have social capital. It's a rite of passage to be part of something with power. Everybody likes power. Maybe they didn't have a group of friends. Maybe they were, targeted or victimized before. So this is like a positive thing for them. And things can spiral across different areas of their life. I don't think, that's always considered is what's going on in their life that could be negatively affected by this.
I'm just going to add too, to piggyback on what you said about power. I think there's so many young people, especially, that are craving just connection, being a part of something, that there's power in just being a part of something, whether or not it has social capital or not. I think it's just this sense of belonging that so many are craving across the lifespan, to be quite honest.
That's right. Yeah, it's so important. And that's where we're coming from as educators and researchers is how do we ensure that everyone has that opportunity to feel that sense of belonging and not have to also, be in situations where they're feeling like they, are in an abusive situation or really are in an abusive situation in order to achieve that. It's so senseless, really. It's not necessary at all. Hazing is 100% preventable.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this. I have a student who just transferred to a new university and they joined a club, right? Not even something that they would expect to have hazing. And they're gearing up because that's part of the weekend initiation, to be a part of the club. And I said, please just be mindful of how far you've come and what your values are as you go into this weekend, and be mindful of, where you draw the line. And her words were exactly what you just said. It's really senseless that this has to be the case, that this is what we need to do to be a part of something that we all have a common shared interest in.
Wow.
Profound, right?
Yeah. And I think that is really another aspect of this that is, demonstrates the challenges is that so many students are, when you ask them about their attitudes, when you measure their attitudes toward hazing, they're not supportive of it. The vast majority are not supportive of it. But yet they find themselves in these situations and feel powerless in many cases to do anything about it.
Let's talk a little bit about these psychological aspects. So, I've read some of the research that, the justification for it is, oh, we don't want freeloaders. Okay. You have to earn your spot. We give you a lot of things as to be part of this group. We don't want you to just join without earning it or proving yourself or proving that you are committed to the group. And to your point earlier, why does it have to be something that's harmful? Why couldn't, people would say, oh, it strengthens the person. They have to get stronger from it, or it's going to help them to bond. And to me, like there's a deep sense of insecurity. Like I always think when people are hurting someone else in some capacity, I'm always looking for the insecurity behind it. There's something insecure within the person. I think a lot of times that drives them to maybe overcompensate by harming someone else, putting someone else down. The bullying literature would suggest that in many ways. A lot of people who, this is not always the case, but people who feel like they've been bullied themselves and end up bullying other people. And that's kind of a trend. That's not the only reason. There's other reasons, as we talked about. People just like power and people get, kind of initiated into being part of that hierarchical structure. People like power. People like to feel powerful, all those other reasons. But definitely want to, and this is not just for boys, it's for girls as well, this kind of deep insecurity that someone may have to be able to feel a sense of power over someone else. To me, like, that's not a great justification for doing harm to someone else, to kind of deal with your own insecurities, No,
I mean, I think we don't know it's very complex, obviously. And so, we don't know for sure all the different causes and motivations. However, you're right. I mean, certainly it can be people who are insecure and find that, this power over someone else is compensating, a lack they feel in their own power. And sometimes with hazing, I think people often point to the group aspect and how, people can get swept up in a kind of group think.
Yes.
So even though they might not be themselves on a power trip, they are complicit in the hazing because they observed it, they went along with it, or they didn't intervene to stop it, and they, were caught up in the group mentality or the dynamic and the power of that group. So that's, and because of that, you have some really strong leaders who just end up leaving the group. And so the group really loses out on some excellent talent if they are a hazing group, because sometimes the people who are more inclined to take a stronger moral or ethical stance will just leave and find, another type of group to associate with.
That's so interesting. So you're saying that any type of positive influence is kind of like pushed out, or they choose to leave, meaning that it's just making any type of resistance even weaker and weaker over time. Wow, that's an interesting point.
Yes. I think, and going back to a point you made earlier, and I just want to make sure that we do make it clear for the listeners that hazing isn't just a fraternity issue, although that is the most common image people have in their heads. And they've often also heard about it around athletics and athletic teams. But the research shows that, as you mentioned, it's happening in performing arts groups like marching bands. We've had a death and some serious injuries related to hazing in marching bands. But you have it in a cappella groups and other performing arts groups, theater groups. You have hazing happening in intramural sports, club sports, even in academic clubs and honor societies. And as I said before, at the high school level, you have class hazing happening. You have hazing happening in summer camps. So I think it's really important for people to know that it comes in many different forms and also in these different types of groups. It's not just, a fraternity issue.
How can a person know what they're getting into? And you had mentioned something on another call that we had about this, that a person joining a group, there's no real way to know, hey, what am I signing myself up for? Because I think this gets into the kind of the cognitive dissonance aspect that makes it hard to not engage in hazing, is that once you begin doing something, you justify it because it's like, well, I already started, I have to complete it, or there's fear of, moving away from something or saying no, or, all that stuff. So I'm interested about that part of it. How do people know what they're getting into when they're joining a group?
So it's such an important question. How do people know what they're getting into? And I think that's something that really has been a focus for policy work in the past few years. And we've seen it in state laws and now in the new federal law, the Stop Campus Hazing Act. And that is a focus on transparency. Because that question, how do we know what we're getting into, is one that has been such a tragic reality, because there, time and time again, when I talk with parents who have lost children in hazing incidents, they talk about they did their due diligence. When their child came to them and said, I want to join such and such group, they went and did their homework. They went on the internet. They looked into what does the group stand for? Did they have any, sort of disciplinary issues in the past? And and never found anything until after the tragedy. So even though they were asking questions, the information wasn't there. And so that's why we needed the policies. We needed to force it, to force more transparency. And so now we're just at the beginning of making that happen, of shining a brighter light so that consumers, so that anyone thinking of joining one of these organizations can hopefully get the information they need and be able to assess for themselves. Does this group have a history of hazing or hazing violations? So that you can start to see what that looks like at the hazinginfo.org website, because we now have 50 states in there in a database, and you can search by college campus, and you can see by group what their history has been. But beyond that, I mean, I think there are sort of red flags, you can pick up on as a student or as a family member of a student, by asking certain kinds of questions about, how does the group, welcome new members, for example. What are some well-known traditions of this group? What are the things they do for fun? And just asking those questions can bring out, and also looking, for other evidence. You can see maybe, again, looking in social media for images of things. So I think it's really just, partly a matter of paying attention and knowing that hazing is far more widespread than people think. And so it's always good to be alert and be thinking that this is a possibility in any group. And so asking questions from the beginning is a really smart idea, even though we know that it's not enough sometimes.
I know that these legislations are focusing on transparency, but is there any responsibility of the universities to train the folks who are in charge of the groups? Because in my experience working with college students, a lot of them will share that they have to go through and watch the videos when they first enter campus or they first enter college, and it's an orientation thing. And, most of the time, per the reports, they're watching it in the background just to go through and answering a few questions and moving on. If I were to quiz them on what they got from it, it's probably minimal most of the time. And even though there's benefit to the exposure of the information more than not, for sure, I wonder how much training is involved in these group leaders. Because I'm thinking also too, Jerry, about like coaches. Most coaches, especially of young children, they're required to be trained in concussions and all this stuff. And a lot of them really aren't trained in being good coaches or thinking about the risk factors of being involved in a group or having a leadership position. So I don't know if it exists. I'm just curious about your experience and through your work, if there has been any initiative around, the universities or, even organizations. I know that in the workforce, there's different legislation too about how we prepare folks and the leadership for the potential of hazing to arise.
Yeah, it's so important. Well, the Stop Campus Hazing Act requires that prevention be a campus-wide approach, and that it includes not just the students, but campus staff and faculty.
Oh, thank you for that clarification.
We've been working with some high schools recently to train coaches and teachers and administrators, and we've had some really great feedback, and that they're so appreciative to have the information, and especially the resources around how to build the healthy cultures
that's great.
within their groups. And so investing in that kind of skill building so that they can avoid hazing situations. But what we found at the middle school and high school levels especially, is that sometimes people will say, oh yeah, hazing, yeah, we got that covered in the bullying policy.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, hazing, we dealt with that because we have, education about bullying. And the problem is, as I mentioned earlier, there can be overlap between the two, but they're not the same.
Mm.
And so if you're trained in bullying, it's going to be helpful for hazing, but it's not enough because hazing looks like a process of inclusion often.
Right.
That's such a great distinction.
Bullying is really, people are trained to think of it as exclusion.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they often don't see hazing even when it's happening right in view.
So
because it looks like something else to them.
That's so interesting. I'm going to kind of tag on to the idea of bullying being different from hazing, because in preparation for today, I was thinking a little bit about this bystander approach that we hear a lot about through bullying. And you mentioned this a little bit about how sometimes people who just don't agree with the hazing behaviors kind of filter themselves out and choose to not join the group if that's the value in the behavior or the tradition, as they call it, of how things go. I wonder if there's research too, or if you can share a little bit more about this idea of like a bystander effect, somebody who's a part of this and doesn't believe in it, if there is a way to raise the concern in a safe way that it's been effective, or how you help to train young people or those who are part of the programs to understand that if this behavior is harmful in any way, it really shouldn't be happening, or there might be a way to set that boundary to, respectfully exclude yourself and also bring light to the fact that this is harmful.
Yes. I mean, we are strong proponents of a bystander intervention approach because we know it is, evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
In other arenas, there hasn't been enough research for specifically applying it to hazing prevention.
Oh,
Nevertheless, we're developing resources for it because it's shown promise in these other arenas, and resources and research is in development. But one thing I will say, that number one, of a bystander intervention approach, if you think of the common five-step process, the first is to notice it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to notice the behavior before you can think about intervening. And so that's where we're at with hazing, is first we have to educate people enough that they even see it.
Wow.
So once they notice the behavior, they interpret it as a problem. That's number two. So they might notice the behavior, but they might not understand the harm that can come from it. Like I said before, they notice it, but they think of it as a tradition, or they see it as just some antics or pranks. And if they don't recognize the potential harm, they're less likely to intervene. So those first two things are where we're putting a lot of effort first. And then after that, as you said, it's like, okay, how do we develop the skills so that young people can intervene safely?
Mm-hmm.
And so that they know where they, a trusted adult they can talk with, or a way to report what they're seeing, or skills to confront it in the moment in a safe way, or in a humorous way, in a way that doesn't put them at any kind of risk. So we have resources and guidebooks and workshops and things on this. But I always like to point out that, all that can be great, but it's not going to be helpful if you don't even notice the problem or understand why, you need to be motivated to intervene because of the harm that could happen.
My brain is just buzzing right now because I'm thinking a little bit about the neurodevelopmental perspective, and I don't even know if you'll have to fill me in if there's any research or work on this already, but I wonder if we as a society have kind of accepted hazing as a thing we just do because it often happens, I mean, maybe predominantly happens to younger people or more vulnerable populations where their prefrontal cortexes and their executive functions are not fully developed yet, which makes them more susceptible to these new ideas that they haven't had enough experiences of. This is not okay. This is not like a normal approach to joining a group, that it kind of solidifies it as, oh, this is just a part of development. This is a part of life. This is a part of, joining a group. I don't know. I'm thinking about all of this as like, how has this gotten so big over so many years that it's become something that we don't even, like you said, recognize and notice that it's happening sometimes.
Well,
That's right.
I think one of the things that I'll pull on from what you had said earlier, Elizabeth, to answer your question, Lex, is that young people tend to inaccurately assume what other peers are thinking. I mean, this can go across the board, right? It could be like, oh, like that person's so popular, they're confident, they have no insecurities. Guess what? They have a ton of insecurities. They're just masking them. You don't really know. And it can span a whole range of these assumptions that young people make, to your point, because, as you get older, you start to have more perspective about life and how things work, right? And so when we're thinking about hazing, Elizabeth, that what you said earlier really speaks to me, is that most people are going to assume, oh, like they're not complaining about it. So everyone thinks it's fine. And also, I'm imagining the person like standing next to their buddy. They're like, yeah, this is great, isn't it? We're a big part of the group now. It's almost like a movie scene of like, yeah, we're doing it, right? And the reality is like, they're literally just trying to prove themselves while they're enduring something that could be really, really painful. And, denial is part of life too. We see this in therapy all the time. People can be in denial about things that have been hurtful. I'm not suggesting that people need to begin to see themselves as a hurt person and then it gets worse, but like admit and acknowledge that these things are not okay and harmful. And so, I think, as you said, the bystander approach is so important, because if you can begin to help people realize other people also don't like this, also don't see this as normal, that to me is the most powerful way, if it could hit a critical mass almost of more people. And because otherwise it just seems like people have to get in trouble for this to stop. Like, what else is going to stop it? It's like people get in trouble and then, people push the limits, and young people push limits all the time. They're rebellious. That's part of the rebellious developmental stage, to your point, Lex, like, kids, young people. Especially if they grew up with like way too much structure in their life, they're gonna like want to push the boundary and do risky things as a rebellion to whatever they grew up with. So there's always,
especially if their brains aren't ready to say, no, this is not a good idea. Maybe you should inhibit and pause and check yourself.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really critical. I mean, powerful forces and dynamics that need to be considered with hazing as contributing factors. At the same time, we're working with a research group that's studying hazing in medical training.
Wow.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So,
can you say more about that?
Yeah, I mean, and this is, again, we're hearing from folks we work with that this is, like, these are sort of elements of the culture that people have come to normalize, and they don't like it necessarily, but it's, say, the sleep deprivation involved in medical training, especially as a resident. Sometimes being treated, like, the least powerful, like the medical student who is just dumped with, all the cases at the kind of grunt work that maybe the whole team should be sharing, but gets put on just sort of like another version of, oh, let's have the rookies pick up all the equipment and the trash on the bus and the, fill all the water bottles and no one else on the team has to do it. And they say, well, that's fair because we had to do it when we were rookies. And so now it's their turn. It's kind of like that way of thinking And people just have come to accept it as just the way things happen, the way things are done, and to be part of this this sort of profession. You just need to deal with it, find ways to deal with it. I mean, I have hope that it will change, because I think back to when I was growing up, that was kind of what I was told about bullying. It's just out there, it's going to happen. And, it's just part of life, and you have to deal with it. And here's what you can do. You can either do this, push them back, or you can hope that, you tell an adult and that they do something about it, Whereas when my children were going into middle school and, or grade school, there would be like all this messaging around the school about a caring, respectful community. And there was like really different efforts to create a climate where bullying was not an expected part. It could still happen, of course, but there were expectations being articulated and values and sort of visible ways in which the school community was thinking about how we want to be together. And it didn't include bullying as a sort of a foregone conclusion. So I think that, the same thing if you think about sexual harassment over decades. Mm-hmm. And after the Me Too movement, I think we can point to a number of things, that have built over time to shift the way we think about what's okay or what's just part of the way things happen, or and so I think where we're going with hazing is that the more that people get educated about it, the more people are able to shine a light on it and help people to make the familiar strange, so to speak, of like, and say like, what are we trying to accomplish here? And if that is what we're trying to accomplish, like have a tradition or welcome people into this new group, then we can find ways to do it differently without having to rely on hazing.
I feel very fortunate to be able to pull from like a lot of literature and a lot of experiences across the lifespan and all the people I work with. And, I'm thinking about the positive youth development literature, and I'm also thinking about the longevity literature and thinking about how we cultivate these more welcoming, developmentally supportive environments. And then I'm also thinking, on the other end of the spectrum of, the aging literature, and thinking about how being a part of a supportive community essentially helps you to live healthier, longer days, right? Mm-hmm. And in thinking about, the value of community, the value of these groups is so beneficial that I almost wish that the work that you are doing, and I'm sure you feel the same, just gets amplified so much that it's pointing out the benefits across the board for really looking at this differently. Because I'm also thinking about, from childhood development, this idea of ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences. Yes. And I almost feel like we need to have a term for people who go through hazing, right? Adverse hazing experiences, because I imagine that there's some very important developmental markers before and after having these experiences, and how it shapes the trajectory of your life, and how it maybe manifests into more aggressive relationships in the future, because that's what you went through in the past, and that's what you think bonds people together, and that becomes your way of relating to others. And then also, how does that play out in the long run? Because you mentioned before this hierarchy, especially in medical school or graduate school or with teams, that there is going to be a hierarchy where the new guy joins something, and there's a lot to learn as a new member of a group. But does it have to be a negative experience where you have to do all of the grunt work to a point where it's harmful to you or others, right? And I think that's an important distinction that we need to magnify and amplify. And I'm so glad you're doing this work. They're just wondering what you both, as having more expertise than me in hazing, think about all of that.
Yeah, from what I remember about the bullying research too, that there is sort of like this risk if you bully other kids in childhood, there's a risk of doing other types of interpersonal violence or interpersonal aggressive behaviors later on in life. To your point, behaviors. It's like a kid who has like defiant behaviors early in childhood. They're more at risk for having behavior issues as they get older.
Right.
Which is why early intervention is important. One of the things I want to point out here too is that we're talking about why, like Alexis and you, Elizabeth, you're both saying like, why do we have to do hazing? To what end is it reaching? To what end, and why is it necessary? I feel like a lot of conversations just lack critical thought and nuance. Meaning like hard work, as you're talking in the medical profession, hard work gets conflated with doing all those things that you talked about, to be like basically being hazed to prove yourself. And to me, like these things get conflated because people are they're not looking at the nuance of what we're actually talking about. Like sometimes people have arguments. It's like, you guys, you're having two different conversations. Like there's no nuance to what either side is saying. And like, can we get on the same page about what we're actually talking about? And so, we're talking about it from different levels. And so, like, for instance, like even in like a sports world, we want to push mental toughness and being hardworking and pushing yourself to the limit. That is not the same thing as being like abused by your coach and having your coach, push you beyond your limits, because nobody knows what those limits are. Like there's no clear demarcation of like, hey, that's too far. And if you go too far, nobody's probably going to say anything, or they may not say anything because like, they're afraid to speak up, or nobody wants to get benched, right? It's the same type of dynamic. And so I think language is really important, because I think when we're talking about earning your spot or hard work or proving yourself, right? That, as you're saying in our conversation, that's not the same thing as enduring like derogatory, hurtful comments, behaviors, abusive experiences. They're just different things, and they don't have to be conflated as the same thing. I think nuance and critical thinking and through language could make a big difference. But then again, a lot of topics in society don't have nuance, don't have that critical thought, because it's just two loud voices, yelling at each other about what they think is right.
So true. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm a big proponent of hard work and, athletic training and however people want to challenge themselves as far as, whether it's professionally, academically, physically, and, but that's different. You can have that and not have hazing. I think, it all too often, as you say, the conversation devolves because people are not willing to look at the nuances or think critically about it. And I think that's why it's so important to make space for conversations, because whether it's in the family, at the school, on the sports team, at the summer camp, because you can have a policy, saying we're not going to haze or hazing won't be tolerated, and you ask everyone to read it. It's not the same. It's important and definitely should happen, but it's not enough. We really need to have the space and some supports for having conversations around this, to explore it, to tease out these nuances and help people to understand and really, feel more confident in recognizing it and understanding like why, being able to explain why this is not okay. We have those kinds of, sort of free resources on the StopHazing website, and we'll share the links with listeners. But, for example, one is a facilitation guide that has scenarios. And it'll say, here's a scenario. Now, let's take this scenario and and describe how it could become hazing.
That's awesome.
You get people talking about, well, you add this and you add that, or you make it like this. It's so helpful. And so the resources are there. It's just a matter of making the space and prioritizing the conversations.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to comment of, I teach at Boston University in the graduate program, and one of the professors there, Dr. Jennifer Greif Green, she's done research, and others I think have done the same type of research around bullying. The research showed that when people are given a description of bullying behaviors and they were asked, hey, were you bullied? If they use the word bullying in the description, kids are more likely to say, no, I wasn't bullied. I wasn't bullied. But if you give the description of the behavior without using the term bullying, they'll say, oh yeah, that happened to me. So meaning that, I'm sure it's similar in hazing. If you use the word hazing, people may not, they may downplay it. Oh, it's fine. But if you just describe the behavior like, hey, if someone ever did this to you, how would you feel about it? They'd be like, no, that's terrible. But, if the word hazing is used, because that's the context of joining a group, being initiated, that language shift is so manipulative in a lot of ways. It's like, oh, you put the word in context, everyone thinks it's okay. But if you were to just ask a common person, hey, do you want to do this behavior? I don't want to get into details about the horrible things that could happen. They'd be like, no, I don't want to do that. Why would I do that?
Right. Yeah, that same thing plays out with hazing, where, for example, in the research, we, for that reason, didn't use, when we initially asked students, we don't use the term hazing. We say, did you, in order to join to join or belong to your club, team, or organization, did you experience any of these things? And then there's a list of behaviors. And of that, when we use that, when we analyze that data, it's about 55% of college students have experienced hazing. Then when you ask them directly, and were you hazed? Of those that were, only about 1 in 10 identifies that they were hazed.
Wow. That's profound.
Yeah. And then, another thing that going back to something you said about the attitudes, the data do support, as you mentioned, that most students, the vast majority, don't support hazing. We've been working with that data to do a really powerful intervention called the social norms approach. So we take the data and we correct a misperceived norm, because the students often think that all their friends or their peers think hazing is okay, right? So we take that data and we say, actually, this is what most of your peers think.
Yeah.
And so we're just at the very beginning stages of sort of measuring the impact of it. But some researchers at Cornell University have done that with hazing, and then they've done a follow-up study, and they found that it has increased, the rate at which students are likely to say they don't support hazing. So
I'm going to make a little bit of a stretch, but I'm thinking about, especially middle school kids. And now it's like, I have a third grader who told me that this is happening in his classroom too. The expansion of trends and how quickly those move through populations and groups. I'm thinking about the language that little kids are using. The biggest one right now is 6, 7, right? And thinking about all the kids are going around going 6, 7, and it has no real meaning, but everybody's saying and doing it. So everybody thinks they should be saying and doing it. Right. And it reminds me of this group think of, if everybody's saying and doing it, shouldn't I be doing it too? And I'm thinking about, especially, a lot of young people, I'm not going to just say children, but young people with learning disabilities, with underdeveloped executive functions, and especially autistic people who have difficulty in understanding social situations and seeing things playing out as if that's the way it should be, and then participating as if that's what they should do to be able to belong a group. And I would be remiss not to bring up the idea, because I work with so many educators and school systems and families and even organizations to help better understand how learning is so variable, and we have different ranges of how we understand information, not only in traditional learning environments, but also in our worlds, just in social communications and interactions. And, this is a big vulnerability, in my opinion. And again, post-COVID, where a lot of kids did not gain a lot of really important developmental social skills at the time point that they normally would, because, most of people were wearing masks. You didn't learn nonverbals. A lot of kids were isolated or just interacting through screens. And a lot of people now still are interacting through digital environments. But I just wanted to mention this and and ask you if there's any additional research that you've found, especially with populations who might be more susceptible through having a diagnosed learning disability or be on the autism spectrum.
Yeah. Oh, such a great point and, perspective, because absolutely. I mean, hazing, because it is about an abuse of power, it preys on, in many instances, perceived vulnerabilities, whether it's because someone doesn't have group membership yet or isn't perceived to be a full member but wants to be. That's one type of vulnerability. But then there's all these other types of vulnerabilities that are, circulating in our, or are connected to our identities. And so they definitely are a factor. I don't know of any research yet that has examined, students with, learning disabilities or in the autism spectrum. But certainly, gender is, something that has been examined, hazing. And we know that hazing cuts across all different kinds of demographic groups as far as race, gender, age, but socioeconomic status. But we need to do more to understand some of the nuances around other aspects of someone's identity. And yeah.
Elizabeth, we're kind of getting towards the end of the interview here. It's been just a depth and breadth of understanding of such an important topic that, as I started off by saying, and Alexis and I, we were just like, who's talking about hazing?
Yeah.
Like, is anyone talking, other than the poor parents who lost a child or whose child had a terrible experience? Like, besides that, where are the voices talking about this? And, it's such an important topic. And, there's a psychologist, Dr. Todd Rose, whose book, Collective Illusions, is so in line with what you're saying. I definitely recommend you reading it. His research basically is suggesting that when you're part of a group, the individuals within the group tend to have diverse opinions. And yet, when you're part of the group, you assume that everybody thinks the same thing and you can't speak up, which is essentially how groupthink evolves and grows, is that, and essentially the groups want, that the group to kind of evolve in that type of way, because that's the group identity, right? Where people tend to actually don't have the same exact opinions. They may agree on a lot of things, but they may disagree on certain other things, but they're not going to talk about the things they disagree with, because that risks their group inclusion, that risks us being ostracized. So it's so in line with what we're saying. I just, want to say thank you so much for bringing this topic to light and all the diligent work you're putting into it. And this conversation has been great, and maybe we'll continue it in the future episode.
I have one last question, and then we have one final question we ask all of our guests now. And my one last question, I often ask parents and caregivers that I work with, what is your definition of success, right? When you're thinking about your child and what you want them to get out of their schooling, their life, whatever the case might be. And sometimes they want them to do the best they can. And sometimes that's at all costs. And sometimes young people will get this mindset of, I'll do anything to make my parents proud, or to do this or to achieve that. And I was wondering if we talked a lot about a lot of different approaches and how to help kind of quell these potential adverse experiences through hazing. But I wonder if you were to think about one piece of advice that you would give to parents and caregivers around helping their children to better understand that they can be quote unquote successful without pushing themselves too far or doing something that maybe isn't in line with their values or something that could be harmful, which, can potentially open up to hazing. I wonder if you have one piece of advice that you would share with parents and caregivers about the risks of hazing and potentially, what you would suggest in terms of what success could mean or look like for them and their children.
Yeah, I guess I would say with regard to hazing that if you're in a group that is hazing, that these are probably not the friends that you want to have. Mm. There are other people out there. And so think twice, or more than that about whether or not this is the group that you want to be a part of. And it's always hard because, sometimes you feel like you've invested so much or this is your only shot. But there are more opportunities and there are people out there who are wanting to also be, who want the best for you and your well-being and aren't going to expect you to endure abuse in order to be part of their group.
That's such a great answer and so much in line with, doing psychotherapy with college students. That I see so many college students in my practice. And it's such a vulnerable time that also has such promise because it's sometimes the first time in their life they have independence to choose, to have choice in terms of how they see themselves, what kind of people they want to be with. And I think your comment is such a precise one, right? You do have choice. And I'm going to encourage people to not be afraid of that choice. I think young people today, we've talked about this in other episodes, Dr. Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this. Young people today are not, there's kind of a trend of not having a lot of independence or kind of making decisions for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that could make it very hard once they go away to college when they have all the freedom in the world to make decisions. And so, it's important, have a mentor, have someone that you trust, a therapist or a parent or an uncle or cousin, right? Having someone that you trust to process this and to see who you are as a person, the value who you are as a person, right? And I always work with people to help them to understand who they are and to appreciate all different aspects that make them who they are. And as you said, remind them, there's a lot of other people who feel the same exact way you feel. They want friends too. They want to meet new people. They're just too afraid to try. So if you can get over your own anxiety, your own social anxiety, your own worry about being awkward or taking the first step, right? We all got to kind of face our fears. And in a lot of ways, a lot of my work is helping people face their fears. And this is one way it can happen. And it can shift to get you what you need. Because I think when people feel stuck, it's because they think there's no alternatives.
That's right.
And life does have alternatives. You just have to be patient. You have to be brave and rely on people that you trust and to find them and to really value your true nature of who you are and yes. trust in that.
Well said.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. This has been amazing. I always ask people in my practice when I'm doing a therapy session, I end by saying, what are you proud of and what are you grateful for? I know this is not therapy, but I'm trying to bring this into the podcast because I think it's a nice way to end on a positive note. So I'll ask you, Elizabeth, these days, what are you proud of and what are you grateful for?
I love it. Oh, I'm proud of the work that we're doing at StopHazing, the team, the amazing people who really care about this issue and are doing really excellent work to make an impact and make a difference, a positive difference in the world. And I guess that covers what I'm grateful for too. I guess I'm also, I'm grateful for my family and I am grateful for the beautiful fall colors that I'm seeing outside today.
Yeah, here in New England, it's quite the day, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I wrote a song called Fall New England. Check it out. It's all about that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely want to check that out.
I'll send that to you.
My incredibly talented brother does multiple things.
I didn't know about that other talent. All right. I'm going to have to tell you.
Well, we are incredibly grateful for you and for the work that you're doing. This is so important. And I think the more that we can normalize that this is not normal, I think the more people will better understand how to support themselves and be able to support each other and really work to change that culture in all groups, to be able to think about what is possible rather than what we feel like we just have to do, more of the same.
Definitely.
So true.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. And I just appreciate you opening up the space for folks to learn more and reflect and hopefully be part of the solution.
Well, thank you so much. We're so grateful for you. And
likewise.
Enjoy the weekend. Be well.
Thank you. You too. All right.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks for tuning in to the ReidConnect-Ed podcast. Please remember that this is a podcast intended to educate and share ideas, but it is not a substitute for professional care that may be beneficial to you at different points of your life. If you are in need of support, please contact your primary care physician, local hospital, educational institution, or support staff at your place of employment to seek out referrals for what may be most helpful for you. Ideas shared here have been shaped by many years of training, incredible mentors, research, theory, evidence-based practices, and our work with individuals over the years, but it's not intended to represent opinions of those we work with or who we are affiliated with. The ReidConnect-Ed podcast is hosted by siblings Alexis Reid and Dr. Gerald Reid. Original music is written and recorded by Gerald Reid. The recording was done by Cybersound Studios. If you want to follow along on this journey with us, the ReidConnect-Ed podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks each season. So please subscribe for updates and notifications. Feel free to also follow us on Instagram at ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. That's ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, and Twitter at ReidConnect-Ed. We are grateful for you joining us and look forward to future episodes. In the meanwhile, be curious, be open, and be well.